gentlemen, let me welcome you on behalf of IATEFL Ukraine board, and I would like to welcome you and to declare that the 21st annual conference is now open. This conference is the largest ever, with over 250 participants and speakers from not only Ukraine and Great Britain, but from Austria, from India, from Poland. So you have a chance to exchange your ideas with all of them. In particular, I would like to express my highest gratitude and a warm welcoming to our plenary and featured speakers as well as the presenters. We would also like to express our heartfelt thank you to the British Council to Ukraine for being the organizers and supporters of the event. Gratitude and appreciation go also to the rector Viktor Agnivyuk and his collaborators who made this meeting possible, having organized this comfortable venue and all the events facilities. Today we have a special guest. We are highly honored that the president of Global IATEFL, Maržorī Rozenberg, is among us today and will read the conference this morning. I would like to recognize especially the serious commitment of the members of the IATEFL Ukraine Organizational Committee in preparing for this conference and their active leadership through these months of preparation, meetings, consultations, conference planning, fundraising in a spirit of true cooperation. This support and contribution are important not only in making the conference happen, but also in helping to the IATEFL Ukraine to become a vehicle for positive change in English language teaching in the 21st century and beyond. So, please allow me to say a few words about the name of the conference. We call it as 21st Annual Conference of IATEFL Ukraine, in order to talk about the changes in the ELT that 21st century has brought and inspired significant changes in the field of English language teaching, especially in Ukraine, where this year has been proclaimed as the Year of English Language. Global English, English as an international language, and English as a lingua franca are the key expressions and words of these days that have been used by the educators to enhance the importance of teaching and helping people to gain practical skills. At this conference, we would like to raise the following questions. What would the way forward be for language education in Ukraine? Would it be technologically driven, more humanistic, more interculturally relevant, or all of the above? Also, how will these changes affect the language classroom, teacher education, as well as our curriculum design and materials development? We hope that this conference generates a constructive discussion as well as raise more questions like how we can go about ELT in the 21st century in Ukraine. Thank you all and enjoy the conference. And I would like to invite for greeting the lady who helped us to organize this conference. It is Natalia Nikolaevna Vinnikova, the Vice Deputy of Rector.
Dear participants of the 21st Annual Conference, dear guests, Boris Grinchenko Kyiv University is proud to be the co-organizer of such a necessary and interesting event. It's especially symbolic to hold such a conference this year, the Year of English in Ukraine, as declared by the President of Ukraine. It's my pleasure to pass sincere greetings from director of our university, Professor, Doctor, Academic of Pedagogical Science, Academy of Ukraine, Viktor Ognevyuk. Certainly, nowadays, the English language plays very important role as a language of international communication. The knowledge of English will facilitate access of citizens of Ukraine to international economic, social, educational and cultural opportunities for the integration of Ukraine into European political, economic, scientific and educational space. Understanding such a significant role, we have implemented the program of English classes for our staff in Grychenko University this year. We are a municipal university that prepare future teachers of English and the present teachers of English employed at Kyiv schools develop and improve their skills at our university annually. That's why we are happy to welcome the teachers of English from different parts of Ukraine in our university. Grychenko University is open to innovations as we are trying to keep up with the times, and we understand that today good command of English a must of Ukrainian people. I'm sure that conference program grants fair chances for communication in the professional environment and provides the opportunity for teachers of English as a foreign language to find the latest publications and services at the exhibition in the lobby. I wish all of us a productive work at our conference, interesting workshops, constructive dialogues and discussions. Good luck and enjoy the conference.
And on behalf of the Minister of Education and Science, let us invite for greeting Deputy Minister Pavlo Hamzei.
Добрий день, шановні колеги. Добрий день, шановна пані посол, шановний пане директор British Council, шановні люди, які підтримують Україну, і наші дорогі вчителі. Я хочу сказати три речі. Перша річ – це подякувати державі Great Britain, British Council і всім людям, хто допомагає Україні розвивати освіту і робити реформи. Це надзвичайно важливо. Щиро вам дякую. Big thanks for all who support Ukraine. Thank you very much. Друга подяка, безумовно, вам, вчителям. Тому що ми говоримо про реформи. Ми очікуємо прийняття закону про освіту базового. І ми розуміємо, як Міністерство освіти, що насправді не так важливі структури, важливий, звичайно, зміст, важливі підручники, але найважливіше це і вчитель. Якщо вчитель не зміниться, що б ми не казали, не декларували, школа наша не зміниться, і діти не будуть щасливі ходити до школи, батьки не будуть задоволені тими послугами, які надаємо, хоча я це слово страшенно не люблю послуги. І воно залежить від вас. Підніміть, будь ласка, руки, хто є агентами змін, хто вже бере участь у проєкті, який British Council проводить. Так, не так, щоб густо, але трошки є. Дякую вам, ми на вас страшенно розраховуємо. Ми страшенно розраховуємо на вас, тому що оця модель, яку спільно з Go Global Міністерство освіти запускає в Україні, ми хочемо дивитися як модель із інших предметів. Моє бачення таке, що є три основних предмети, навколо яких треба робити цей national curriculum. Це є українська мова, це є іноземна мова і це є математика. Тобто ви з іноземної мови у нас 80% це є англійська мова, безумовно. А хто не має англійської, то все одно другою мовою буде англійська. Бо розуміємо, що без англійської мови зараз дуже важко в світі робити ті чи інші речі. І нам дуже розходиться, щоб цей рівень англійської мови був належний. Ми мріємо про те, і хочемо це писати в стандартах, щоб базова школа, та нова базова школа, яка, ми не знаємо, коли вона стартує, це ще є інтрига. Ми тільки знаємо, що початково стартує з 1 вересня 2018 року, а далі, чи в цей же рік стартує базова, чи старша школа, це ще можуть депутати вирішувати, тому що позиція міністерства стартувати одночасно старшою школою у 2018 році. І відповідно до цієї концепції ми би хотіли, щоб 9-класники, я не скажу 100%, але бодай 75% не ви були на рівні Б1. А точно цей академічний ліцей, трьохрічний майбутній, хто пішов в цей напрямок, англійська має бути на рівні Б2. Якщо це є такий рівень, то відповідно рівень вчителів не може бути нижчий Б2, бо вони не навчають на Б2, якщо не мають. І я не знаю, який відсоток наших вчителів, а мені кажуть, Б2+, мав би бути, можуть досягнути. І оця допомога Британської Ради і інших організацій розвинути наших вчителів, щоб не досягнули, тому що не можна вимагати від людини, якщо ти їй нічого не дав. Це некоректно є. Треба дати можливість досягнути цих результатів. Про зарплати я не говорю, я дивлюсь тут з усміху. Це болюче питання, але поганий рівень англійської дає можливість добрим вчителям заробити. Тому що якби була добра англійська школа, то репетиторства було менше, а так, добрий вчитель, принаймні не нами, а батьками завжди є винагороджений. Тому з вами легше говорити в цьому розумінні. Це є перше. Другий великий виклик, що стосується початкової школи. Початкова школа не може сегрегувати дітей в 6-літньому віці, робити ці невиправдані ніким вступні іспити, які ми маємо. Ми не знаємо, як це зробити насправді. Це дуже складно. Але ми чітко знаємо, що програма, і це записано у проєкті закону, що програма початкової школи не має поглибленого вивчення предметів. Ми всі йдемо за одним стандартом. Ну, це не означає, що ми зараз скасуємо школу з поглибленим вивченням, які вивчали англійську мову з 1 класу і досить успішно це робили. Ні, ми декларуємо інакше. У нас всі школи будуть мати однакову кількість годин з іноземної мови, більшості з англійської мови в всіх школах. А проблема, хто їх читати буде. Тобто ми дамо, але хто буде читати. І тому ваша асоціація, яка нараховує, мені казали, біля 500, 400 так осіб, нараховує, це теж є ознака громадянського суспільства. Тобто ви як асоціація, як елемент громадянського суспільства, який повинен теж впливати на зміни в країні і брати на себе певну відповідальність. Тому що без довіри між державними органами, між громадськими організаціями, між тісної співпраці, ми ті завдання, страшенні завдання, які стоять перед нами, надзвичайно складні, надзвичайно ризиковані, але ми не зможемо виконати. Якщо ми будемо разом, якщо у нас буде одна мета побудувати країну, в якій хочеться жити, побудувати школу, до якої діти хочуть ходити і отримують там радість, я думаю, ми це можемо з вами зробити. При підтримці міжнародних партнерів. Я бажаю вам успіхів. Ще раз наголошую, ми страшенно як міністерство на вас, вчителів англійської мови, це кращих вчителів, які страшенно розраховуємо. Посвятіть себе, бодай ці 3 роки цій справі шкільній, а далі вже заробляйте гроші. Дякую вам. Успіхів. Я дуже перепрошую, бачите, мене англійською добре не навчили, хоча я комунікую. І враховуючи те, що в мене англійська не дуже добра, то я покину, щоб українською вам не заважати говорити. Вибачте, будь ласка.
Дякую вам, дуже класно. Let me invite to the greeting speech Oksana Kovalenko, we can say our long life supporter and partner, just few words to greet us. She is a chief specialist of the Ministry of Education and Science.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Sorry, yeah, it's better to stay here because of I'm not very high, and not so high as our deputy minister, and I'm very happy to be here with you. I'm very happy to be here with you and share all these ideas and values of our English teacher's profession. I know that you all are very professional, and you are all real teachers because you are members of such important association as it is called IATEFL. I know that you are very happy to attend every seminars, training courses, workshops, everything which is connected with your future profession and with your development. I know that you are happy to improve your knowledge of English and not only English. And I'm very happy to see faces of our partners. I mean, British Council, British Embassy, representatives of British Embassy, representatives of international IATEFL organization, and we are very happy that we have got as a special guest the president of IATEFL organization. And I hope that all this help us not to improve only our real knowledge, but I think that we could help our students to improve their knowledge. And if it happens, everything will be okay with our country, with our future, with our children. That's why, good luck.
Thank you so much. And we have a special honorable guest, it's Sаймон, Вільямс, Director of British Council of Ukraine, who helps us to link, develop and support because they create the opportunities.
Thank you. I'm going to stand behind the desk if that's okay, so I can put my paper down. Thank you very much for the welcome and for the invitation to speak today. British Council mission is to create a friendly knowledge and understanding of the UK and to create relationships between the people of the UK and the people of other countries. To do that, you need to communicate with each other, and to do that, you need to be able to talk to each other, and having a common language, as English now is, the common language of the world conversation, is very important. IATEFL Ukraine is a very old friend of ours. I think we helped set it up in the very beginning, in the early 90s. For many years we've worked with the National Conference and the activities. We've been very pleased to bring experts from the UK and other countries to share their experience, but also to learn from your experience. We're very honoured today that we've got Marjorі Rozenberg, President of the International IATEFL, the IATEFL, here to speak. So Marjorі, thank you very much for coming. 2016, I think, is a really exciting year here in Ukraine for all of us involved in English. The fact that it's been designated the Year of English by the President, of course, it was always important to us, but I think it gives a fantastic extra impetus, a great extra sense of attention from the media, from politicians, from business people, that really opens doors for all of us who believe in the power of English and the value of English to push what we do and to get greater understanding and acceptance of the need to learn English well. I've got a long list. My colleagues very kindly did some speech notes for me with a long list of things I could talk about, but I'm not going to. What I would say is go and look at our website. We have lots of activities. Go and look at the website of all our partners here, Cambridge, Oxford, and the other publishers. All of us are working. You'll have seen, I'm sure, the huge explosion of English language, original language films now being shown in Kiev and other cities in Ukraine. And that initiative has really just sort of seems to have happened in the last 6 months. And we were always told by cinemas, by TVs, companies that people in Ukraine, they don't like subtitled films, they want dubbed films. And actually we see that just in the last 6 months that has completely changed, and there's a huge demand for original language films, not just in English, in other languages as well, of course. So I think it's a real opportunity for all of us to widen that demand for English in ordinary life, as well as in professional life, as well as in educational life. I'm really, really proud as the British Council in Ukraine to have been part of that process for the last 24 years. Next year is our 25th anniversary, so we look forward to being with you here to celebrate that a year from now, and also going on into the future. So, thank you very much for inviting us to speak here. Thank you very much for the support you've always given us, and I must extend my thanks also to the Ministry, and also to the Embassy. The Embassy and the British Government have always been very supportive of the importance of education and culture as an important part of the relationship between our two countries. I would say there's an old saying in the UK, not a very politically correct one, so you probably can't say it anymore, about behind every great man there is a great woman. So you can't really say it anymore. But my version of that is, behind every successful learner of English, there is a great teacher of English. I think that's absolutely true. You are all great teachers of English. What you do is creating successful learners of English who will create a successful Ukraine for the future, for your children, for your grandchildren, for the next century. So my congratulations to you for what you're doing. This is your opportunity over the next 2 days to celebrate what you're doing, as well as to share your experience, to share some of the fantastic stuff you're doing with our visitors from other countries. And I wish the conference well. Thank you very much.
We are especially honored today to invite to the greeting speech the Deputy of Her Majesty Ambassador, Helen Fezi.
Good morning, and let me start by adding my welcome to all the participants of this conference today. As has already been mentioned, English comes under a particular focus in Ukraine this year, since the President proclaimed 2016 as the Year of English and supporting the Go Global Education Initiative. That's great for us as the British Embassy and the British Council in Kiev. Great also for you as teachers of English. And the British Council, as our sort of the cultural arm of the UK, has supported this initiative of the President in many different ways, including by helping teachers of English to develop their professional competence. Why English? Well, perhaps I should ask you that. I grew up speaking English. You've all chosen it as your career. But in short, English opens doors for everyone. There are about 1.5 billion people in the world who speak English. 75% of the world's letters and postcards are written in English. It's a language of almost all international conferences, scientific discussions, competitions in all sorts of fields. It's the language of diplomats and politicians around the world, as one of the main languages of organisations like the European Union, the United Nations and NATO. English helps everybody to engage with an online community around the world. It's a great language of international communication that brings with it almost unlimited access to information. And it helps people to improve their study and career opportunities. I should say a word about the overall relationship between UK and Ukraine, which we at the Embassy and the British Council are trying to assist. What is the UK doing here in Ukraine? Our mission is to support the aspirations of Ukraine and her people as you modernise the country and hope to become better integrated with the rest of Europe. We are helping positive change in various areas, whether that's through political cooperation, economic or military cooperation. But improving and increasing links between Ukrainian and British people and institutions is a very important part of our mission here. And included in that is helping to reform the Ukrainian higher and secondary education system and supporting the professional development of teachers. As a result, we hope to see increased opportunities for greater collaboration between the education sector in the UK and Ukraine. This conference, which I know the British Council has been supporting for a number of years, is one of the ways in which we are trying to do that. So I'm very pleased to be here and to have been invited to speak at the opening of your conference. I hope that you have some very interesting and fruitful discussions during the course of the event. And again, warmly welcome you all to the conference. Thank you very much.
And our wonderful guest, Maržorі Rozenberg, the president of IATEFL Ukraine.
Good morning, everyone. It is really lovely to be here. I've heard about Ukraine for years. I live and work in Austria. I originally come from the States, as I assume many of you can hear. But I have a number of students from Ukraine in my classes at the university. Lots of Erasmus students, and they are some of the most hardworking and motivated students I've ever had. And now I see why. This has to be due to all the hard work that you put in before they leave Ukraine to go study abroad. They're just great to work with. And I'm really glad I got to see some of the sights yesterday, not everything, so I have to come back. It was a fascinating day traveling around the city, and very impressed with everything that I saw. It's wonderful, and the food is great. I have to be careful so I can fit into my clothes for IATEFL next week. So IATEFL, as you call Global IATEFL, I've heard all sorts of names for us, International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. We have about 4,000 members worldwide. And we have, at the moment, at the last count, 111 associates, of which you are one of them. So these associates are local teaching organizations around the world who are associated with IATEFL. We are coming up to our 50th conference, begins next week in Birmingham. And we're very excited about this because the size of the conference has grown slightly since the first one, which was held in London, that had 125 delegates. We're expecting about 2,600. In addition, there's another big anniversary being celebrated. It's the 10th year of the wonderfully generous live stream provided by the British Council. So the conference, large parts of it are online and free of charge to all who log in and watch it. So I encourage you to have a look at what happens. It should be starting, I think it's next Tuesday. I'm a little confused in my dates at the moment. But if you go to the website, www.iatefl.org, you'll find the information about the live stream, also on the British Council website. And 2017 is actually our 50th year, so we are gearing up for lots of activities to go on during that whole year. We actually are very pleased to have been recognized by TESOL with the TESOL President's Award. We received this on Wednesday at 8 in the morning in Baltimore from Andy Curtis, the president, for our mission of, and you can read it here, linking, developing, and supporting teachers worldwide. We're extremely happy about this, and we are delighted with the work we are able to do to encourage teaching, supporting, helping teachers, like the work you're doing here in Ukraine, which I have heard is just fantastic, training local teachers to then train others and to teach. This kind of work pays off. It is just great, and I applaud you all for all the work that you're putting in on this. Very much looking forward to the conference, and thank you again to the British Council and to IATEFL Ukraine for inviting me to come and have this opportunity to speak to you all. Thank you. Stretching out of my comfort zone because I have my timings written down and now they're going to be a little bit different. Plus I have to be able to see my slides. So the topic of this talk is getting unstuck, getting out of our comfort zones. And many of us, we see our classroom. We might occasionally see the teacher's room if we have time. But we basically live in our own little worlds. Would you agree with that? Is that true? Many of you feel that way. Is that why you're here now? This is a way to get out of our own little worlds. There are times when I see only my students. Last semester at the university I teach at, I was in a completely different building. I wasn't even in the building with the language department, so I would arrive, open the door, teach, lock the door, and take the bus home. I never saw anyone but my students. And that's the reason that I started thinking about what we can do to change that situation. But first I'd like to know about you. Go to the next slide. So, I'd like to know how long you've been teaching. Can we click on the first one? Click. There's some text that should come. Yes, so how long have you been teaching? Next one, the next text. Yes, how many of you have been teaching 1 to 5 years? Can you raise your hands? Okay, can everyone welcome them to the profession? Some applause, please. Yes, thank you. Okay, 6 to 15 years. Okay. looks like a lot. 16 to 30. Wow, okay. And now the big one, 31 plus. And we're still doing it. Great. Okay, and now, how often do you try out something new? How many of you try something new once a month? Okay, twice a month? Once a week? Twice a week? Every day? Anyone? Oh, wow, that's great, fantastic. I'm glad to see that. Okay, but sometimes, can we go to the next slide? We do feel like we are stuck in a rut. We feel like, okay, this is a lovely photo of mud, if you can see it. Does anyone feel this way? Could you have a short chat with a neighbor about how you feel, and if you have ideas of your own of how to get out of this rut we get stuck in? Can you have a little chat with the people sitting around you? Anything out that they use themselves to get out of this rut? Anyone? Quit your job. What was that? Quit your job. Quit your job, okay. Creativity, yes. Anyone else? Ask for help. A day off, yes. I taught school in the U.S. for 2.5 years. It was an incredibly difficult school to teach in. It was a very bad neighborhood, difficult children, and we had what we called mental health days, where you just said, okay, I need a day just to get my head together again. It was, yes. So mental health days are something that sometimes we need. They're very important. Okay, well, let's have a look at the other problem we have is routine. So the next slide, yes. Does anyone feel like you're in Groundhog Day? Do you know the movie? I don't know what it's called in Ukrainian. I know what it is in German. This movie with Bill Murray where it repeats over and over and over. You wake up and it feels like you're in the same day you were in yesterday and the day before. Anyone feel that way sometimes? Okay. So let's have a look at what we can do to get out of that. We'll go to the next slide. Now, these are the things that I assume or thought of that keep us from trying out new ideas. Have a look at the slides and shout out if there's anything I forgot. You can all read them. Is this in the way? Should we move this further? Anything else? Laziness. Okay, I didn't want to put that. Well, maybe that goes with no motivation. A nicer way to say it. More politically correct, perhaps. Is there any one of those that you feel particularly applies to you? Time. Yeah, I agree. That's how I feel with certain things as well. Which one? Pressure. Pressure to get things done, and so you don't want to try something else. Understand totally. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So in order to think about how to get out of our comfort zones, I thought it was important to figure out who we are. So I did some crowdsourcing on Facebook and asked people, what is a teacher? And these are answers that I got. Does anyone have any ideas here of anything else you think we are? Social worker, yeah. That's coming on the next slide, I think. Anything else? And for me, I definitely live my job. That's why I love coming to conferences. I get to talk about it, whereas at home, my partner is not that interested in hearing what went on in the classroom. Anyone else have that problem? Okay. People, that's why we go into teaching. We like to be around people normally. We're good at listening. I think I'm also an experimenter. I love trying out new things. We have empathy, we have challenges. And I think we also enjoy discovering new things. This is why I love working with a variety of students. I learn so much from them. Very important for me. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. I was given this by a friend. This is where social worker comes up, I believe. I don't know if you can read all of them. Administrator, social worker, coat finder, arbitrator, government directive reader, curriculum implementer, artistic director, form filler, very good at that, language specialist, pencil sharpener, accountant, musician, fundraiser, report writer, nose wiper, luckily not at university, doesn't usually happen, public relations officer, petty cash clerk, examiner, surrogate parent. Unfortunately, also at university, where I say, I'm not your mother. I can't come to your house to tell you what the homework is. You really need to write this down in class. Walking encyclopedia, scapegoat, but you can just call me a teacher. How many of you does this sound familiar to? Anybody? Yes. Okay, so what can we do? How many of you have actually asked yourself what you can do about this? Next slide. Anybody? Rather than running into the brick wall we saw earlier, have you thought about what we can do? There are different ways to get there. So with the next slide, I'll show you some of the different ways. We can take a superhighway, or we can go down a lovely country road through a tunnel, or we might get on a road with some things in the way. If you can see, those are, I don't know, cows, I think, crossing the road, or sheep. And sometimes there's more than one way to get there. These signs point to exactly the same places, but in different directions. So what I did was I identified areas that I thought you can look at to see how you can get out of your comfort zone, and that's the next slide. So we might try a new method. We've heard about something, we go back from a conference, we say, I'm going to try that in my classroom. We might actually teach a new subject. Have any of you taught new subjects recently? Anybody? Yes. Okay. We might use new technology. Does anyone use new technology in their classrooms? Something you hadn't used before? Yeah. We can take advantage of CPD, continual professional development, and that's what you're doing here, so I don't have to ask, you're all doing it. We might change our learning style. I'm generally very visual, so when I do anything with listening comprehensions, they're a challenge for me, but I need to do that. I need to teach students how to do it, even though I'm not comfortable. Our colleagues. I teach in a language department with all languages, and sometimes we just chat. Something that worked in the German for Beginners course, I can can use in English, or in the Spanish class, or in the Ukrainian class, whatever. There are wonderful ideas, and sometimes they just fly around, passing someone in the hallway, and they say, I just did this great thing in class, and I'll go and I'll try it out. Why not? Our PLN, how many of you know what this is? Anyone know? This is our Professional Learning Network. And there are several of you who I'm already friends with on Facebook who are part of my PLN. This is where I did my crowdsourcing. And this is where I get so many of my ideas. And going into a new area of ELT. We'll have a look at that. So, to take a quick look at our global contributors here, I'm just going to show you some names. These are the people who answered my call for help in this plenary. You can see they come from, I think I had 22 different countries. Jersey, that's not New Jersey, that's the original Jersey, the island, near, what do we say? Great Britain, or it's part of Great Britain. It's in the, I think it's, is it in near the French coast? Okay. And Russia, Germany, Algeria, Greece, Brazil, Thailand, Spain, US, and so on. And then the next slide. Yes. I think Sandy's now in Poland, yeah. Iran, again Greece, Hungary, Armenia, really from everywhere. People answered this on Facebook and sent me ideas. So what I'm going to show you, and you can get the slides, I can send a PDF so you don't have to write things down. It's very difficult to keep up with writing down all these things. These are ideas that colleagues just like you around the world said they have done to get out of the rut they were in. So we're going to take a look at those, and then I'm going to show you some other things you can do as well. So let's have the next slide. So new methods. The idea with that was trying something out that was new. And maybe go back to that slide. This came from Sandy Millen when she was, I can't see it. Does anyone recognize these dice? I think she was in Ukraine when she took that photo. Does that look familiar to anyone? Is it Russian? Okay, I don't know. I know she was living in Sevastopol when she sent me the original information she sent me. She's now in Poland. Okay, she's at IH, International House. So, an excerpt from the Merchant of Venice. This is a colleague in Algeria. A riddle from Shakespeare. Has anyone ever tried anything like that? Anybody? Done anything with Shakespeare in class? No, okay. And she used it, and they were completely surprised, but they did it. They went ahead and did what, often if we are convinced, the students will do it. If we're not convinced, they feel it, and they don't try it out. So there's one to try. Good, the next one. This was letting the students put together the revision of the curriculum. I do this as well. I give them examples of what the final exam is going to look like. I tell them what material to look at, and they write the revision questions for each other. Has anyone done anything like that? Yeah? And does it work? They like it, yeah. And they feel, first of all, they're taking learning into their own hands. We become, instead of the sage on the stage, we become the guide by the side, and they are doing the work. Okay, the next one, combining theater techniques with teaching unplugged. So teaching unplugged is a big topic, not using course books, not using technology, but using theater. Does anyone use theater? Yeah, I use different things occasionally. Okay, the next one. This is interesting. This is a colleague in Greece who used TPR, total physical response with adults. Has anyone ever done this? Does anyone know about TPR? Do you know TPR? This is where you hear a command and you react to it. It was apparently used to train military people, US military, because they didn't need to speak the language, they needed to react. But for adults who are feeling uncomfortable, the idea of movement at the end of a long day could be great. I used to play musical chairs a lot with groups of adults. We would sing the irregular verbs, so begin, began, begun, sing, sang, sung, and when we stopped, they had to find a seat, but there was always one too few. And I had a group of government employees, high-level government employees, who were so enthusiastic playing the game, they broke a chair. Never seen anything like it, so TPR. Okay, the next one. So, new subjects. Can you see what this is up here? Can anyone see what that is? I don't know if we turn these lights off, if it's easier to see the slides. I'm not sure. Oh, there's on there as well. Okay, that is a turkey being stuffed. Now, I chose that because I used to teach nutrition students, and one thing I did with them was to cook with them in English. And that was fascinating because they taught me so much. I mean, I would come with my measurements and measuring out, and they're like, what measurements? They just kind of, they knew, they felt it. They knew when the dough was the right consistency. They didn't measure anything. But we cooked a Thanksgiving dinner together, so they learned all about the food, all the words like stuffing and turkey and cranberry sauce. We had a great time, and it was a very different kind of lesson. And then they had to write things up about it. And they began teaching classes to students in English and having demonstration lessons in English. They were great. So new subjects can be fun. Let's see what students have done. Yes, Sue, who gets a new group every week. She said, for example, she had ferry employees. Do any of you get new groups on a regular basis? Anybody? Yeah. In my most difficult one, I think, I had, I have to think how to translate it. People who watch the cars in the tunnels to make sure there are no accidents. No idea what this is called in English or in, I mean, I know it in German, certainly not in Ukrainian. So they would sit in a little booth like that, watching on closed circuit TV what was going on in tunnels. And I was supposed to teach them English in a day. And these were people who had not had a lot of schooling, so they didn't have a lot of English. But they needed to learn to be able to react if somebody said help, accident, and they told me the strangest story was somebody who phoned their phones along the tunnels. Austria, I don't know if you know the Austrian tunnels, there are some that are 10 kilometers long. They go through the mountains. And somebody phoned and said, there's an airplane wing in the tunnel. I said, there's a what? There's an airplane wing. And they said, okay, have you been drinking? No. So they went down and they discovered it was someone had been transporting some kind of seaplane on a trailer and the wing fell off and was lying in the tunnel. So this was a great story. But you have to adapt to these classes. You have to figure out how to work with them. Not so easy. Okay, and I love her comment. If you look interested, it usually turns out okay. Next one. Okay, this is Emma in Israel, who got new classes with Iranian students, and this is all online teaching, and she found it so fascinating. She was sent the information, so they needed to prepare for a meeting with whatever. She would get the information, prepare the lesson, and then get beamed into their office or home in Iraq. And she said it was an amazing experience, and it changed every week. But she also was able to establish wonderful rapport with them, which is fascinating, I think. Okay, the next one, new technology. Now, this is a challenge for some of us who are not we're not actually digital natives, we're digital immigrants, and I am very definitely in that category. I have learned to use some of the technology, but some things are beyond me. So let's have a look. Yep, next one. Yes, Elena started using Prezi. Does anyone use Prezi instead of PowerPoint? Okay, it was really popular for a while at conferences. I haven't seen it lately, but she really liked it. She also uses Vocaroo and MentorMob. These are with videos. She's very technically advanced. I just am amazed by the things that Elena does. I met her online through the TESOL Electronic Village Online. Does anyone know that? This is a 5-week program that goes on 6 weeks every year through TESOL with different subjects, and she was in our business English one, and she was just such an amazing participant. In the meantime, she has won a scholarship from the Business English Special Interest Group of IATEFL to come to Birmingham. So getting involved through that technology, now has gotten her. She came to a conference, she presented, everyone was very impressed, and now she's won a full scholarship for Birmingham. So these kinds of things, you never know where they lead. Okay, the next one, Bit Strips. This is our Algerian colleague. Oh, I don't know a lot of these people, only online. And PB Works. Does anyone use wikis? Great. You guys are ahead of me. Okay, the next one. Anyone on Facebook must know Sergio. Anybody know him from Facebook? He's constantly on Facebook. Yes, he travels everywhere. And he uses everything imaginable. He'll also be in Birmingham. I don't know if it's a scholarship, but he has become known through all of his work. He was one of the people I used in a webinar we did for new first-time attendees, because I know him through the technology. Next one. CPD, what's the picture? Why did I choose that picture? What is it? Conference program, of course. That's our main CPD, or one of the big ones. Okay, so going on, yes. CPD obviously is going to include things like conferences, and as you'll see, things like CERT IBET, CERT TESOL, and so on and so forth. We'll do the next one. These are mostly about these kinds of things people are doing. Can we have the next one? Yeah. Sandy, lots of stuff online. Sandy, I don't know, does anyone know Sandy or know her through Facebook? Also very active? Yeah. She just published her first book. She announced it yesterday through The Round, which is also an online group. Luke Meddings and Lindsay Clanfield, I think, who help new authors to come up to develop the book, to produce the concept, and it's produced as an ebook. And it's on speaking activities, and I think it costs $1 or something like this. Yes. Okay. Dana, who also was in our Electronic Village course, also then, because of her activity, won a scholarship to, I'm trying to remember which conference, I think Harrogate. We paid for her completely to come from Argentina. So she's been very, very active. Okay. And she's working with British Council. Hannah, who I haven't met, only know online, doing lots of stuff, MA, tweeting, blogs, and so on. Okay, the next one. And Philip, who was also in the Evo class, who's one of the most active people I know online, just does everything. He takes advantage of every bit of professional development he can, and technology. Okay, the next one. And Omid, who took part in the TKT course. I have to check again because I have now again forgotten. It's just slipped. Teaching Knowledge Test from Cambridge, and then working with those colleagues later. Okay, so the next, MA Deltas, and so on. Next one. Okay, CELTA, MA. To the next. Okay, stretching out of our styles. I like this picture because this is teaching science through movement to kids. So rather than giving them an abstract concept of something, they actually had this, it's a little hard to see in the picture, but they had this, whatever this creation was, the kids got to be part of it, so that they learned a new way of looking at an abstract concept, which is stretching out of the style. Okay, next slide, yes. So, Alexandra from Macedonia said that she started doing more kinesthetic things, even though that was not her thing, like I said with my auditory. And the next one, Dana starting to use auditory, even though she's more visual. How many of you feel that visual is your favorite channel? Do you need to see things? Okay, how many feel they're more auditory? Now, this is usually the smallest group in all the work I've done. And we generally teach in a very auditory fashion. And kinesthetic, how many of you feel you need to move around to learn? Okay. So when we use a different style, it sometimes is a bit frightening because we're not comfortable. We generally teach in the way that we learn ourselves. Okay. And Tanya, who is the editor of the conference selections for IATEFL, said that she started doing more computer things, and it's just a different thing than she was used to. Great. Becoming more hands-on. Okay, so the next one is colleagues. I don't know who this is. Looks like somebody I know, but I'm not sure. Okay, the next one. Yes, Antonio in Brazil actually started training colleagues. Does anyone hold courses for other colleagues? Anyone here? Yes? Yeah. And as I said, you never know when you're going to learn something from a colleague. Our colleagues have a lot of knowledge, and we all have different experiences, so they can be the best source sometimes. And the next, Sergio also, he's worked with colleagues. Next one. And Helen. Helen does everything. She said she has business breakfast at her house, for example. And she gets to meet lots of nice people doing this, but she's extremely active in Germany. She's from the UK and has just tried out all sorts of things. So let's go on to the next. This is the PLN. Does anyone know this? This came up on Facebook about 2 years ago, I think. It was one of those things you could click on and it made you a collage like this. Did anyone do this? Yeah? Okay. This was from Rosalie Serra in Brazil, who I've met once, but we are good friends online. And I used it as the example of the PLN, because that's what this is. These are the people that I am in touch with, mostly virtually, sometimes face-to-face. Okay. So Omid, for example, after doing this course, stayed in touch with the colleagues. Do any of you do that? Are you in touch with colleagues? Yes. Okay, that's your PLN, and they are there to help you. They really are valuable to have. The next one? Yeah. You can see going to conferences, social networks, definitely. And the next one? New area of ELT. Can you read this? Okay, well, the English is definitely interesting. So, okay, this was from Sandy. Is this Ukrainian and Russian? Okay. Is the English correct? I mean, we don't say, don't throw it into the lavatory pan. I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to mean. I can guess, but is that what it says in Ukrainian? No, okay. Okay, so a new area of ELT. Now, why am I showing this? Well, this is a wonderful opportunity to contact whoever is responsible for the translations and say, there's a slight problem with the translation. I'm happy to offer my services. Has anyone done this? Did you get a job? No, okay. Well, in Graz, we had the most awful translations for the public transport system. And they said all kinds of strange things. And one was okay, it was British, but, okay, does anyone know who is famous from the city of Graz where I live? Anyone know who our most famous citizen is? Schwarzenegger, exactly. So in British English, you say the train terminates here. The problem with anything using the word terminate or terminator in Graz is that people think of Schwarzenegger. I said, I think we need to find another word for this. But they also had some very odd translations of things. And I was working with this department, and I said, I think we need to change these to more global English. I got the job of not only doing the translations, but doing the announcements. So sometimes something like that can lead to a little bit different work. It's not a steady job, but it was a nice part-time thing for a while, and it's kind of fun. And visitors, a colleague was coming to a conference last week and sent me a message on Facebook that said, OMG, is that you on the bus? So, it can be a fun thing to do. Okay, the next one. So, course coordinators using Skype. Does anybody teach with Skype or Google Hangouts, or some of you do? Okay. Next one. Yeah, being a dose. Anybody here, director of studies, in charge of other teachers? Okay. Copy editing, okay. Blogging, does anyone blog? I haven't done it in a while. Bloggers? Right. Again with Sandy, and she said she's starting to do some minor things. Now she's published. And the next one, yeah. Writing for newsletters. Does anyone write for all the newsletters? You have a newsletter here as well, I'm sure, right? IATEFL Poland? Is there excuse me, IATEFL Ukraine. I know IATEFL Poland has one. Does anyone write for IATEFL Ukraine or any of the other newsletters? We're happy to get your contributions for Voices, the IATEFL newsletter, and the special interest groups. There are 15 of them, and we'd love to see things coming in from associates. That'd be great. So you take a look at IATEFL online, our website, and see what the special interest groups are, like Business English, Young Learners, Learner Autonomy, and send in an article. Does anyone write for newsletters? Okay, there's the challenge. That's one you can do. And this is Helen, who's done absolutely everything, including editing, peer-reviewed journals, speaking at conferences, setting up university programs, but she hasn't tweeted or blogged. How many of you tweet? Anybody? Okay, great. And the next one. Yes, starting an online community. And the next? CERT, and so on. Okay, next one. Exchange programs. Does anyone go abroad with students? No? You do? Okay. And the next one. Okay, Tanya, working on a book. And the next. This is interesting. Writing a fiction book for ELT learners. Has anyone tried that? I haven't done that yet. I keep thinking that's the next thing I want to try. Very scary. And then we have wonderful Vicky, who just won an award. This was on Facebook yesterday, and you're going to see why. Okay. So, what I did to think about this, I believe very strongly you have to walk the talk. Do you all know what that means? I'm not going to stand here and say, you should do this, and not actually have tried anything myself. So I went home and I put together a timeline of what's happened in my ELT career since 1981. And I can remember going to my very first conference in 1994. I was terrified. It was the very first one. I was talking about NLP. I had just done my training. There were people in the audience who knew more than I did. I had planned it to be interactive, and it was in one of those lecture halls with the staggered seating, so people couldn't move at all. And it went okay, but I thought, okay, I've done it once, I'll go to the next conference. Or things like, can we go back to the slide before? Yeah. Things like, I became chair of Teachers of English in Austria. How many of you are active in IATEFL Ukraine? We have the committee, anybody else? Okay, getting active in your local teaching association. Absolutely great way to do things. And can it help you professionally? Okay. I'm teaching a group at my local bank, and one of the reasons I keep continuing extending the course is because I come with real life situations of managing a team and running meetings, and they say, wow, you're not just an English teacher. Because I'm bringing in my volunteer experience into the classroom. Otherwise, I don't have business experience of managing teams. I never did that. I worked in advertising, but I didn't manage a team. But in IATEFL, I do. And this is something that I can relate to with them. We had a discussion about crises, and they said, we don't have any. And so I mentioned one, and then they went, oh yeah, right, we had that, and we had that, and we had that. And it has helped me professionally enormously. So you never know where these things come from. Teaching online for the first time in 2014. I'd never done that before. And then, starting to blog, things like this. So what I would suggest you do after this talk is, when you go back home, start your timeline. Put together your own timeline and see where you have come from, because when you start thinking about it, you begin to notice what you've done. Okay, so we're coming now to what else we can do. What's out there? Well, obviously there's writing supplementary materials, there's blogging. Have a look. I think you've indicated that you've done a number of those things, is that right? Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of things you can do. Does anyone take part in ELT chat? A few of you, okay. What is it? Well, it is a Twitter group, I guess you could say. There is a topic chosen each week. You can suggest topics, and then they are voted on, and it happens on Wednesday at noon and in the evening. Here it would be really late. I guess it would be at 11 at night and at 2 in the afternoon. So one week it's at 2, the next week at 11. And you tweet about the topic. It's completely free, it's moderated. There's a group of moderators who deal with this. And the next slide shows some of the topics that came up. Like, are some teaching styles better than others? It was a very interesting discussion. Should everything in class be fun? These are topics that are then discussed through tweets. You have to be very concise, they're short. What else? Beginnings and endings of lessons. It's a really fun one to do. How to be an ELT writer, favorite tips for Plan B activities, and so on. And then a summary is posted of the tweets, and they ask for a summary writer. They don't always get written up, but very often they do. They're on their website. There's a whole summary of the ELT chat topics. And this is free continuing professional development. You can find them on the internet. I have all the links at the end of the slides anyway. So how many of you have done this? Only a couple. Okay, how many of you think you might want to try it out? Wonderful, excellent. Okay, let's go to the next one. ELT picks, one of my absolute favorite things in the whole world, besides chocolate, I guess. Does anyone know ELT picks? Okay, ELT picks started, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. They are photographs taken by teachers for teachers. You cannot use them in commercially published publications, in books. You can use them in presentations, in the classroom, and so on. So what you do is you take a photo, you then go to their Facebook page, and you just say, this is for the category ... and you put your photo there. And one of the administrators then uploads it. These are categories. I think there are something like close to 30,000 pictures that you can use. So if we take a look at the next one, these are some examples. So there's a category called Every Picture Tells a Story, and I just love it. You know, you give that to students and say, okay, what happened before this? What's going to happen? What do you notice about this? Or in this, what is it? You get a little bit of something. It could be, it might be, and then you show the whole thing. Or adjectives. That one is New York. It was peaceful. There's all kinds of categories. There's the senses, okay, adjectives, idioms, trying to remember what else is on there. Classrooms, people, emotions. Have a look. It's just called ELT Picks, and they have a Flickr site that you go to download the pictures, and they are great. How many of you can use something like that, free pictures in the classroom? One of the contributors, Sue Annan, said, it saved my life. I had this group that I didn't know what to do with. I went to ELT Picks, I printed them out, laminated them, and it was my whole lesson. You never know. Okay, the next one. Yes, this is another one similar, the map of the urban linguistic landscape. Does anyone know this one? Yeah. These are photos, generally of English, but made of other languages. It's signs that people have seen around the world that they photograph and they put on that Facebook page. So there are different, this is Museum of Broken Relationships. So you would show them to students who then can work with them, write a story, make comments, and so on. It's all you need is love and a dog. So you could say, who would have posted that? Why would they post it? Do you agree with it? How many of you think that's true? Anybody? All you need is love and a dog? Yes? Only a dog. Okay. I took lots of pictures in Barcelona because I was fascinated by all the English. Okay, the next one. The Disabled Access Friendly campaign, and this wonderful group won an Elton 2 years ago. British Council, this is the highest award we have in ELT. This is a group that gathered lesson plans to teach people about people with disabilities, mobility disabilities, so wheelchair users and so on. And it is filled with free lesson plans that you can print out, download, and use in class. Absolutely great campaign that started in Greece. Wonderful stuff. And the next, okay, simple English videos. So this is the wonderful Vicky Hollett. Does anyone know these? You're going to get to see one in a minute. Okay. Vicky just posted last night on Facebook. They won an award in the US. It's called YouTube Next Up. And they're going to get a week of training in New York on how to make videos and some vouchers for equipment. They've been running this out of their house in Philadelphia. Her husband is a sound engineer. She is an English teacher. She's British, lives in the States. He's American. And they have been producing free of charge videos for teaching English. Now, my evaluations to my students were always not too bad. You know, they think I'm funny or they think I'm nice, but technology was always, you know, way down there. As soon as I started uploading these links to Moodle, my tech grades went up. So we go to the next slide, and we're going to, this is what Vicky says. We're in the business of teaching meanings. Meanings don't just come from words, they come from context. Video is the natural medium for delivering context. Why is anyone still trying to teach with just audio? Okay, can we have the cooker film? I embedded it, but there were some tech things, so we're going to see how this works.
Hey, what's cooking?
Spaghetti bolognese.
Oh, it smells delicious. Who's the cook in your household? The cook is the person who does the cooking. Don't confuse them with the cooker. That's the large piece of equipment or stove that you use to cook the food. So what's the difference between a cook and a chef? Well, they're the same thing, the people that do the cooking. A chef is a very skilled cook, often the most senior cook in a restaurant or hotel. So, if you cooked a meal, don't tell people you're the cooker. You're not a piece of equipment. Tell them you're the cook. Fantastic. Here's to the chef.
It was a pleasure.
Wonderful. There are, I don't know how many of these, they're organized into vocabulary. It's things, is this a problem for your students, those words? Cook, cooker, chef? No? Sometimes, okay. In Austria, yes, because chef is also the German word for boss. So they get that confused. Cooker, they don't understand at all, and that is the stove, the thing you cook on. There's things like borrow and lend, which is one word in German, so they confuse that. things like alone and lonely, sensible and sensitive, which is a real problem in German. Loads of these. They're short. A number of them have accompanying PDF worksheets, which I give my students. And they get about, 7, 8 of these a semester, and they love them. Will your students enjoy this? You can show it in class, yes? You think they'll like them? And they're funny. There are also some for more business English. There's a wonderful one about making telephone calls. There's a great one about greeting guests, what to do and what not to do when you greet a guest at the airport. They've got one, I think, also about checking in at an airport, and they are just a wonderful way of teaching. Okay, the next one. Okay, there is a Facebook group called Trying Something New. Does anyone know this? A colleague in Greece who did this. And on this wonderful site, I discovered the next video, which we're going to watch. This is a TED Talk. We can go to the next one, which is going to give you some ideas about trying something new. Try it out, it did work.
I was stuck in a rut. So I decided to follow in the footsteps of the great American philosopher, Morgan Spurlock, and try something new for 30 days. The idea is actually pretty simple. Think about something you've always wanted to add to your life and try it for the next 30 days. It turns out 30 days is just about the right amount of time to add a new habit or subtract a habit, like watching the news, from your life. There's a few things that I learned while doing these 30-day challenges. The first was, instead of the months flying by forgotten, the time was much more memorable. This was part of a challenge I did to take a picture every day for a month, and I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing that day. I also noticed that as I started to do more and harder 30-day challenges, my self-confidence grew. I went from desk-dwelling computer nerd to the kind of guy who bikes to work for fun. Even last year, I ended up hiking up Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. I would never have been that adventurous before I started my 30-day challenges. I also figured out that if you really want something badly enough, you can do anything for 30 days. Have you ever wanted to write a novel? Every November, tens of thousands of people try to write their own 50,000-word novel from scratch in 30 days. It turns out, all you have to do is write 1,667 words a day for a month. So I did. By the way, the secret is not to go to sleep until you've written your words for the day. You might be sleep deprived, but you'll finish your novel. Now, is my book the next great American novel? No, I wrote it in a month. It's awful. But for the rest of my life, if I meet John Hodgman at a TED party, I don't have to say, I'm a computer scientist. No, if I want to, I can say, I'm a novelist. So here's one last thing I'd like to mention. I learned that when I made small, sustainable changes, things I could keep doing, they were more likely to stick. There's nothing wrong with big, crazy challenges. In fact, they're a ton of fun, but they're less likely to stick. When I gave up sugar for 30 days, day 31 looked like this. So here's my question to you. What are you waiting for? I guarantee you the next 30 days are going to pass whether you like it or not. So why not think about something you have always wanted to try and give it a shot for the next 30 days? Thanks.
Next slide. It's a wonderful TED Talk. I have put it up for my CAE students. So, one last thought. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. So, in order to change that pattern, we need to do something different. Next slide. A little bit of reflection. Can anyone tell me what you are going to try out? When you're going to do it, or the first step? Anybody? Which one? ELT chat. Anyone else? ELT pics. Anyone else? Which one? Videos. Vicky's videos. Anyone else? Writing for a newsletter. Excellent. Okay, one more. Try something new for 30 days, and that could lead to a newsletter article. Wonderful. Fantastic. So this is something to go home and think about. Think about your timeline. Think about the things you're going to try. Think about things you're going to do. There are so many things. I should mention, we talked about creativity, and I actually should give you this reference. There's a wonderful new publication by the British Council called Creativity in the English Language Classroom. It is free. It is a downloadable book, 18 chapters on approaching creativity in different ways. So that is something that you can just go online. It must be on the British Council website. Teaching English, yeah. And it's great. Lots of ideas in there as well. There's loads of stuff out there. Once you start finding it, it just doesn't stop. Great. So, the next one. Does anyone have a question? It's just about an hour. Anyone have a question? I'll be here all day, so you can ask me later if you like. And thank you. Another flowers for everyone from Shelley Terrell. Yes. And I'll get the slides to. We can sort it. So this is all the websites and the acknowledgements. Thank you so much for all the attention, and I hope you all go out and try something new. Thanks.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I hope it will be a good chance for us to change something in our teaching. And we invite you, Della, to be prepared to show us the way to success. At least we will know how to plan this success. Welcome.
Hi. Hello. But the audience looks very different from up here from how it does down there. Hi. As you can see, my name's Hugh Della. This is actually my third time in Kiev. I haven't been for a couple of years, and it's a real pleasure for me to be back in Ukraine. So thank you to the conference organisers for allowing me to be here, and thank you to Linguist for also allowing me to be here. Most of the time I'm based in London. I'm a teacher and a teacher trainer and a coursebook writer. And for about the last 6 weeks I've also been the co-founder of a new language school in London, which is my kind of new venture for this year. This is me trying something for more than 30 days and panicking slightly about it at the moment. I have to actually begin this whole talk with a bit of a confession. It was very optimistically titled Planning for Success, but actually it was almost a disaster caused by lack of planning, because to call this talk a new talk would be a rather profound understatement. This talk, originally I had the idea for this talk, and I wrote the proposal for the talk and the title and the little conference blurb that you can read there. And then I basically forgot about this talk. And about a week ago, I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm going to Ukraine, I'm supposed to do a talk about planning. And I made a few notes on the back of an envelope and started kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And basically finished it on the plane coming over on Tuesday. So, to call it Planning for Success, as I said, it is a sort of bit of an optimistic overstatement, because this is very much the first time I've done this talk and the first time I've taken it out. And as I'm sure you know, when you take a new lesson into the classroom, it can be a terrifying experience. If you're lucky, it can be a very exhilarating experience. And when you take a new lesson into the classroom, you never really know what's going to happen with it. And I'm in a similar situation with this particular talk, so let's see where it's going to go. Like most good lessons, what I'd like to do, I think, is to begin a little bit from the people in the room, apart from myself. So if I can just have the next slide there. One of the things I'm going to be talking about is the way I've come to change what I think is important when we plan lessons, and sort of tracking my own journey, thinking about what it is we should be doing when we're planning lessons for the classroom. And what I'd like to begin with, really, is just for you, with the people next to you, just to think and talk a little bit about what you do when you plan, okay? So think about, has the way you approach your own lesson planning changed at all? I noticed from Marjorie's session, we've got some sort of, relatively young teachers here who've been teaching in the 1 to 5 year bracket. Maybe planning is still sort of a bit of a nightmare for many of you. If you have only been teaching a short time, has it changed at all, the way you plan, what you think about? How long do you spend planning your lessons? I suspect for many people the answer is too long. And what do you think the most important questions to ask yourself when you're planning are? Okay? What goes through your mind when you're thinking about putting a lesson plan together? Can I just give you a few minutes with the people next to you? Just to share your own thoughts and your own experience about this before we move on. Okay, can I stop you there? Sorry to make you jump. Let's have the next slide there, please. Thank you. For me, when Marjorie was asking this question about how long have you been teaching, it's like an increasingly embarrassing question. I've been teaching now since 1993. Longer than some of you have been alive, looking around the room. And when I first started teaching, which is 23 years ago, my first proper teaching job, I was working in a private language school in London called St. Giles. And I was teaching 6 hours a day, kind of 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 30 hours a week, straight in at the deep end. And at this time, I was probably spending more time planning than I actually was teaching. I would have said I was spending at least 1 hour stressing, panicking, freaking out at home time, thinking about what I was going to be doing in the classroom for every hour that I was actually teaching. And, this is a very difficult way to live. It's a sort of unsustainable way to live your life in any kind of long-term way. But this was very much the way I was when I first started teaching. I'm guessing for many of you it's probably a fairly similar kind of experience, that if you're lucky, you spend as much time planning as you do teaching when you first start out. And probably, like most of you, when I first started teaching, it was a course book I was using. I was basically given headway. Here's your book, this is what you'll be doing for the next 3 years. And I spent a lot of time, I guess, at the time I thought, trying to make the book work for me. And probably, like all of you, when you get a book that you're supposed to be using or that you've chosen to use for your teaching time in the classroom, you try and make it work in a way that feels best to you. And I still have somewhere at home the very battered, dog-eared copy of Headway that I did my first teaching from. And it's very, very heavily annotated. I wrote all the answers in the course book, was the first thing I did. I then started writing all kinds of extra little notes and putting post-it notes in there to say, could do this extra supplementary game here. Here, you could do this extra activity. And eventually I had kind of as many bits of paper sticking out of the book as there were pages in the book. I also started developing, in conjunction with a couple of other teachers I was working with, my own supplementary files. So I had these big files that I kept in the staff room that were sort of open access, that I could go to when I'm thinking, okay, tomorrow I'm doing Headway Upper Intermediate Unit 2. I'd go to my supplementary file and I'd have all of this extra, probably illegally, photocopied vocabulary sheets and grammar sheets and communicative activities and all this extra kind of stuff that I could bring into the classroom to do. And it's quite strange for me now, looking back on my early days as a teacher, because obviously part of what I do now is I work in publishing, I'm a course book writer, and if you talk to publishers, publishers have this idealistic dream of somehow producing the magic course book that is easy for teachers to use. And this is something publishers often will say to you when you're writing, we need to make sure it's easy for teachers to use. And I've often thought what a strange idea this was, because Headway sold tens of millions of copies all over the world. From a publisher's point of view, this must have meant it was easy for teachers to use. But actually, if it was so easy for teachers to use, why was I spending 30 hours a week adding all this extra supplementary stuff and thinking about how I was going to exploit it and trying to work out what I was doing with it? And I think part of the problem, and this is what I'm going to be talking about in the first part of this talk, is the way that I was trained to think about what's important when we're planning lessons, and the way in which I was conceptualizing what I needed to do in order to maximize the course book or to get more from the course book in the classroom. One of the other ironies, I think, was even though I'd spent a lot of time, well, possibly because I'd spent a lot of time supplementing it and working out how to exploit the book and working out all these extra activities, I was doing probably 50% of my teaching from the book and the other 50% from various bits of photocopies. And you could look at this and say, well, you're not using the book to its full capability. Why don't you change? But actually, I think when I first started teaching, and maybe to a degree it's still true today, the idea of changing books was quite terrifying, because I'd invested so much time and so much energy in making the book work for me. I was so familiar with it that the idea of someone taking it away from me and giving me something else that I'd then have to go through the same process with really scared me, and I was very, very reluctant to sort of let go of my security blanket. And as I said, I think, looking back, this isn't intended as any kind of criticism of Headway or any kind of criticism of course books in general. I think really it's a criticism of my early self and really the way I was trained to think about lesson planning and the emphasis I was trained to put on different aspects of what we do in the classroom when we're planning lessons. Lesson planning is something very, very fundamental to teaching. It's something we all do. Even if you've been teaching 23 years like me, I still will pick up the material I'm going to take into the classroom before I go in. I'll still have a look at it. I still want to have 15, 20 minutes, half an hour to kind of get my head into what I'm going to be doing in the classroom. And as teachers, it's probably, apart from teaching, the single activity that we spend the majority of our time outside of the classroom doing. Possibly marking, depending who you're teaching. But marking and planning, they're very, very fundamental parts of the teacher's job. And yet, I suspect, actually, all too rarely we reflect on what we do when we plan, or we talk about what we're doing when we plan. If you look through conference brochures or conference proposals, very, very, very few, if any, of the talks are actually about planning and what's important to think about when planning. When I was getting this talk together, I went back and I looked through my old CELTA notes. I still keep my notebooks from my CELTA and Delta courses and sometimes look back on them with sort of terrified astonishment to find out what I was and what I wasn't told at various stages of my teacher development. And obviously, being a native speaker, I cheated my way into teaching. Not like you guys who've actually had to learn English the hard way and then probably done a proper pedagogical degree. Being a native speaker, Cambridge in their wisdom allow you to cheat and just do a very short 1-month course after which you're officially qualified to pretend that you're a teacher. And when I did my actual CELTA, can I have the next slide? Looking back in my notebook, we did one lesson out of 4 weeks on my CELTA course was devoted to planning. And this is basically what I wrote down during my one lesson on the whole of my CELTA course that was devoted to planning. And looking at it again, it's a really peculiar kind of tick list of things I guess I'm supposed to be thinking about when I'm trying to get a lesson together. And the two big things that were written in big capital letters and underlined were balance, mix the 4 skills, shift the focus around. Okay? Interaction. And strangely, for me now when I think of interaction, I think of it as interaction between the teacher and students, interaction between the students, interaction with the students and the language. But here it just said interaction, links and themes. I'm not sure how they're different. Should run through the lesson. Have a clear concept of aims. That always helps. But nothing there about what the aims should be, or whether some aims might be better than others, or whether some aims might be crazy, or some aims might be more beneficial. Just think about your aims. And then the list sort of moves on to things you'll probably want to try and do as you're actually delivering your lesson. So it's things like, elicit information, model the language first, and then repeat it. Bring students to the meaning, stranger, this way, it's over here. Here's the meaning, look. Ensure that there's some kind of personalisation, anticipate problems, plan your stages and your timing. And my favourite piece of useless advice, use props, like an actor, where you kind of, you have a bottle to stand up. So I'm going to teach you the word bottle. Here is a bottle, look, I brought a prop. Not a piece of advice that I actually really brought into my own teaching very much. Maybe I should have tried, I don't know. But that was basically it. That was what I was told was important to think about when I first started my teaching, in terms of going out and stressing and spending my 30 hours a week trying to teach. With these pearls of wisdom given to me during my CELTA course, as I said, I then basically left my CELTA course and started calling myself, very nervously, an English teacher. and found myself working 30 hours a week at St. Giles. And out of kindness or pity, or both, the bosses at St. Giles obviously realised I was struggling to cope with 30 hours a week. And they assigned me a mentor, which was basically an older, more cynical, more hard-bitten teacher than myself, who was there to try to save me a few hours so that I could be dragged off to the pub after work, instead of sitting there stressing about my actual teaching. And they gave me a crash course in how to plan lessons. And if you look at the next slide, this was it, basically. I was taken to one side, and this mentor of mine basically said, "You're stressing too much about planning. It's not as difficult as you think it is, okay?" They ripped out a piece of paper from a notebook. We had this conversation on Monday lunchtime, and they asked me, "What are you doing this afternoon?" So I said, headway, upper intermediate, page 15. I said, right, so it's a reading and some vocab with some speaking. Okay, so write that down here. So tomorrow morning, do something different, okay? Keep things moving, mix it up, keep it varied. Tomorrow, do a listening and some grammar, and then some speaking. And then in the afternoon, yeah, fine, you're okay to go back to reading because you've done some listening in the morning. Then maybe do some grammar revision. I know a great exercise that you can photocopy and do to practice that grammar. And then you can do speaking, vocab, listening, and then vocab, speaking, revision. And then you start repeating it all again. There you go. That's your lesson plan for the rest of the week. Friday, keep it free. Maybe do something the students want, or do a song, or show them a video of 40 Towers or something. Don't worry too much about it. And that was what I then started doing. I basically started mixing things up and keeping things varied and moving things around. And I think what it meant is I started seeing the idea of deconstructing the coursebook as something that was supposedly absolutely integral to my job as a teacher. And I notice it a lot myself when I'm observing teachers. It's a very strange experience observing teachers using the material that you've written, because for me there's quite a clear idea of why that's exercise 1 and why you then follow that with exercise 2. And often I watch teachers who start with exercise 7 and then do exercise 3 and then do exercise 10. And when you have conversations about, just out of interest, why did you start there and go back? I wanted to mix it up and keep it varied. I see. You've had a similar mentor to me. Can I have the next slide? And I think, to be honest, this was really the first 4, 5, 6 years of my teaching career. This was the way that I'd basically come to think about lesson planning. I thought that what was important was chopping and changing, keeping things varied, not doing 2 readings in a row, not doing 2 listenings in a row, not just working through the course book, because that had been presented to me as some kind of teacher-centred, student-unfriendly, slow death. And what was strange for me about this, looking back on it actually, was there was no discussion of actually what you might be doing if you were working through the course book. Because obviously, if you are just working from exercise 1 through to exercise 10, there are 1,000 different things you can be doing within that time. There are different questions you can ask, there are different things you can focus on, there are different ways that you can use what's on the page. But none of this was discussed. What was basically discussed was this idea of chopping and changing. And I think very, very early on in my teaching career, I'd kind of been led to believe that it wasn't so much what you did with the actual language that was important. It was keeping it varied, keeping it novel, keeping it new, keeping it fresh, being a student-centred teacher and not a teacher-centred teacher. And I think as a result, as I said, it kind of reduced discussion of what we actually do in the classroom when we do use course books. And it led to this whole taking on board, in a very sort of naive and innocent way on my part, one of my favourite TEFL acronyms. We have quite a strange profession because it's a profession full of acronyms, PLNs and this kind of thing. And my favourite acronym is ARS. And what ARS stands for is Adapt, Reject, Supplement. And this idea that when we're utilising classroom material, we should be arsing or arsing around if you prefer, is very, very deep-rooted, I think, in English language teaching methodology. And it's an idea that still prevails to this day. Probably, like many of you in this room, the first real book about teaching that I read was Jeremy Harmer's The Practice of English Language Teaching. I read the 1993 edition, which I've still got a copy of at home, and the whole final chapter of this book, I think it was the 3rd edition, is dedicated to the whole issue of planning. And again, when I was putting the talk together, I went back to see what advice Jeremy gave me about how to think about planning in the classroom. Can I have the next slide? And I've chosen a couple of extracts which seem to me to really capture this idea of adapting, rejecting, selecting. So, you know, teachers who overuse a course book and follow the same sequence become boring. Okay, be careful. Nobody wants to be boring. They find themselves teaching the same activities in the same order again and again. Good planning means using variety to offset this tendency. Each class has to be treated differently. Nowhere is this more true than in planning, where we select activities that will be suitable for our students. So again, the focus was very much on the activities and on thinking about exploiting the content in terms of supplementing it, adapting it, rejecting it. And I guess what this means I used to do is probably very similar to what many of you do, or have done over the years. If the topic was something like food, I would think, well, I can't just use the course book, I have to adapt and reject and select. And usually what this meant was I would find extra grammar practice activities based on the grammar that was there. I would probably find extra vocab activities, possibly, 50 different really difficult verbs connected to cooking. I would maybe find some kind of extra communicative activity based around the topic and supplement in this way. What's interesting for me, again, looking back at the Harmer that I kind of grew up teaching from, really, in a sense, is where it talks about language at all in the role of planning, it basically assumes that the language we're going to be teaching is grammar. Can I have the next slide? So it makes quite a few statements in this last chapter of the Practice of English Language Teaching about thinking about the language you're going to be teaching. But as I said, the implication is always that you're going to be teaching grammar. If new language is introduced, we will list some or all of the models, which suggests structural grammar, on any kind of formal plan. We can anticipate that new language for a presentation stage may cause problems because of its form, grammar. The introduction of the past simple may cause problems because of verb endings, question forms, can be difficult because of word order. So again, the advice I was given was, don't worry too much about the language. You're only a language teacher after all. Don't think too much about the language. Think mostly about activities and exercises and supplementing. Where you do think about the language, stress a little bit about the grammar, anticipate the grammar problems. Can I have the next slide? The next book that I read about teaching, and again, I'm sure many of you will have read it, was Learning Teaching by Jim Scrivener. And again, it had a whole chapter based on the idea of planning. And again, the advice was quite vague, and none of it was really focused on language. So the advice in the Scrivener book is, here are some questions that you might want to ask yourself. Think about your learners. Will they enjoy the lesson? Let's hope so. They should do. I'm teaching it. Will they benefit from it? Who cares, so long as they're having fun? The aims. What will they achieve? What are you hoping to achieve? Survival. Keeping my job. The teaching point. What is the subject of the lesson? The skill, or language areas that will be studied. What activities will you use? Again, back to the activities. What sequence will you do them in? Again, you might not want to do them in the sequence they're presented to you in a course book. You might want to mix it up. What texts, tapes, shows you the age of the book. Pictures, exercises will you use? How will you manage your class? How will the seating be arranged? How much time will each stage take? So again, the emphasis was very much on thinking about activities, thinking about supplementing, thinking about chopping and changing the order, and not thinking very much about the actual language that I was going to be teaching. Can I have the next slide? And I guess for the first 5 or 6 years, the way that I came to think about putting a lesson together was very much this idea of stringing different activities together. If you'd asked me in my early days as a teacher, what are you going to be teaching tomorrow? Probably the way that I would have answered this question is, well, first I'm going to do this reading, and then I'm going to supplement it with some vocabulary from here, then we're going to do this really fun game, and then I've got a song. And I guess I used to think about it very much as just stringing together a fun bunch of things loosely connected along a language or a topic kind of theme. And I think the questions that I was asking myself at the time, not that I was always conscious of this, but maybe the kind of unconscious questions that were driving my planning were these. I was basically thinking, how can I add more grammar practice to what's in the book? Because what's there isn't going to be enough. They're still going to have problems with it. Can I add some extra vocabulary around this kind of topic? Because what's there is not going to be enough. They're still going to have problems. And is there some kind of fun or communicative or chatty sort of game that I can give them at the end as a way of saying sorry for all the grammar practice that I've forced them through? And again, even though I didn't know it at the time, next slide, I think there were some beliefs that I don't believe I'd articulated at this time, but I think there were beliefs that underpinned or that gave a basis to this way of thinking about lesson planning. And I think what I probably unconsciously used to believe was that students would somehow develop accurate production of grammar through further massed practice. This idea that, if you can only do enough exercises on the present perfect all together in one great big mass, somehow that will help you develop accurate practice or accurate usage of the language. I guess I used to believe that with vocabulary, it's more important to skim over a lot of vocabulary than it was to go deeper. So I probably used to kind of go wider across a whole range of different vocabulary than really exploring in depth how to use certain items. I used to believe lessons have to be fun, with big capital neon letters, fun. And I guess I used to believe that speaking of probably almost any kind was beneficial. And that, it almost didn't matter what kind of speaking you did, so long as you did some speaking. The student speaking became an end in and of itself. What I'd like you to do, and apologies if this is a painful moment of self-reflection, can I just ask you with the people next to you, just to consider for a couple of minutes, to what degree do you think my journey up to this stage of my teaching career echoes your own? Okay? Does any of this sound familiar to you? Does any of this sound like things you've done or things you believe? If not, why not? If yes, what? Can I give you a few minutes? Okay, can I stop you there? Sorry. Sorry. If it doesn't kill you, it will make you stronger. If it does kill you, then we have problems. Can I just ask, quick show of hands, how many of you does this kind of thing ring bells for? Have some kind of, yeah? Quite a few of you? Yeah? If you've managed to avoid all of these traps, I congratulate you. It must be testament to the Ukrainian system of teacher education. Well done. I guess, can I have the next slide? What then happens, I think, and this is certainly what happened with me, is the kind of road beyond all of this often leads teachers to a kind of logical next stage, which is you start making your own material, okay? And I'm the last person to tell you don't make your own material. I ended up really kind of becoming a course book writer by accident as a result of writing my own material, which then became a kind of obsession, which then became a course book, which then led to me being here. So, write your own material. I think it's a good thing to do. But I think there are a few good reasons for writing your own material. And I think actually there are several bad reasons for writing your own material. And I think depending which reason you're writing for can often very much affect the quality of what it is that you're writing. As I'm sure many of you are aware, over recent years there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of debate about the whole issue of course books in the classroom. Marjorie was talking earlier about this whole idea of teaching unplugged. And I'm guessing many of you will know Scott Thornbury, who's been one of the sort of main anti-course book agitators. And Scott recently published what he called his definitive 200-word dismissal of course books. And for me, it struck me as being quite a remarkable kind of ranting manifesto that I'm going to share with you, because I think it raises some issues that connect directly to what we're doing when we're writing materials and why we're writing materials. So can I have the next slide? Here's Scott's first part of his anti-course book tirade. I'll give you a minute just to read it. You don't need me to read it out. Next slide. There's more. I always wondered what I was doing when I was writing course books, and now I know. Just robbing stuff off the internet. Shush. You'll burst his bubble. Last slide. The complete Cambridge Handbook series that Scott edited, by the way. Can I just ask, out of interest, how many of you use course books regularly in your teaching? Yeah, okay. Doesn't surprise me at all. So apparently, according to Scott, you're guilty of comfort, complacency, conformity, professional atrophy, institutional malaise. Your students must all be incredibly bored. It's slow death, and apparently you're teaching grammar McNuggets. Now you know, you and me both, apparently, because I'm also one of those people that tends to mostly teach from course books. So it's good to be told that we're doing such a great job. Can I have the next slide? For me, I think it's quite a remarkable thing to go into print as actually saying. The first thing is, it's basically accusing anyone who uses a course book for most of their teaching of being lazy, complacent, boring, and unprofessional. Thank you. Very nice of you to say so. This seems sort of a remarkable thing to say, and it seems to, again, avoid the more complicated discussion of what is it you're actually doing when you're using the course book? What are you doing when you're teaching that vocab exercise? What are you doing when you're doing that listening? Are some ways of approaching those things better than other kinds of ways? If you think they are, why? It kind of kills that whole conversation because it just says, course books, boring. Stranger than that, I think, is there's this kind of belief in the validity of teachers themselves writing their own material, and the belief that this material will be truly valuable because you've written it as a teacher. And this belief is being put forward at the same time as there's a kind of blanket dismissal of all published materials that are out there in course books. And it seems to me a kind of strange idea, the idea that you can just dismiss all published course books, and somehow, by not thinking about those horrible, boring, complacent, grammar McNuggety things, you yourself can become a better writer. And that seems to me to be a strange way to encourage people to develop a craft. It's a bit like saying, you can be a great musician. Don't listen to the musicians of the past. Don't listen to published music. It's boring and complacent. Write your own music. You can do it. And I think what this actually does is it leads to a kind of materials illiteracy. Because one of the main ways for me that you learn to become a better writer of materials yourself is by understanding in kind of great detail what it is that's actually going on with other kinds of published materials. And for me, if I'm working with teachers and they're writing their own material, I'm really happy to see they're doing that. One of the first questions I want to ask them is, why is it you've decided to write this particular piece of material? Why do you think this is better than what you would have been doing had you been using this particular course book? So, if you are using Headway Upper Intermediate, Unit 2, and you've decided, I'm not going to do that reading text, I'm going to do this reading text instead, what do you think's wrong with the one that's there? And how is it what you're doing with your material is attempting to kind of correct those flaws? And if you can't articulate that, if you can't answer those questions, I would suggest there's possibly a problem with the material or with your reasons or motivations for wanting to do it. If you can, great, you're on your way to becoming a good materials writer. But I think those are really fundamental questions. If you're deciding not to do text A on topic A, and you're deciding to make your own text B about topic A, in what way are you improving and in what way are you differing from what was there already? Can I have the next slide? I think there's also a kind of problematic notion in the idea that as teachers, we are the only people who can truly know what our students need. Obviously, there are special cases. Okay? When I was listening to Marjorie talking about these kind of very, very niche English for specific purposes courses, obviously, in those instances, you're probably the person who knows best what the guys controlling the tunnels in Austria are going to need. Or if you're teaching a very specific group of people English for a short time for a very particular purpose. I'm guessing a lot of you are teaching general people general English for general purposes. And often the students themselves don't necessarily know what they're going to use their English for. Sometimes they may not even believe they are going to use their English for anything. You may be having to kind of sell the idea to them that, look, in the future, you're going to need this stuff. Maybe, maybe not, but let's hope you will. And, part of what we do as teachers is to kind of sell the idea of a future self to the students that involves them needing and wanting to use English. And I think what Scott suggests, and what often comes out of these discussions of teaching unplugged, is that as teachers, we can truly know what our students need because we hear the mistakes that they make. And I think what often happens is, and I do this myself sometimes, I'm sure you do, that there's some kind of speaking task or conversation or information gap or something that you do in the classroom that you hear the students struggling with. You think, oh, they still haven't learned how to do X, Y, and Z. You go away, you do some kind of post-lesson, post-reflection planning based on this, and next lesson maybe you take something into the classroom based on the problems that you've heard them have in those particular kinds of communicative contexts. And that's fine, but I think we need to be possibly slightly critical of the idea that that allows us to access students' problems directly. Because, as I'm sure you're all aware, sometimes you only have problems because of a particular speaking task that you're being asked to do. The problem might be very particular to that particular kind of context or that particular communicative task. There might be something that you want to say in the context of one task or one conversation, which you never need to say again. And just because you need to say it at one time doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be something that will contribute to your long-term, broader kind of needs. I think also there's often a problem that as teachers, the mistakes that we notice or the gaps that we notice are the gaps that we've been trained to notice most. And most often, that means grammar. So maybe your students are doing a communicative exercise, you notice, oh, they still can't do the present perfect. So what that means is you end up taking in yet more practice of the present perfect, and you do yet more massed practice of, revising different forms, present perfect, past simple, in the belief, again, that even though they've had lots and lots and lots of massed practice of this particular structure, if they can just have one more lesson looking at it, somehow that's going to help them. And for me, this seems like quite a narrow or quite a limited way of thinking about general students' general needs. Can I have the next slide? And I think part of the reality is, in language learning, as in life, we don't always necessarily know what we want. Sometimes we get things that we think we want, and we find out that we didn't really want them quite as much as we thought we did. Sometimes we get offered something that we really thought we wouldn't want, and we decide that actually we quite like it. And I think there's a sort of very narrow idea that we can know what our students' interests are, and we can kind of work out from the whole group, this is what these students will be most interested in doing next. Because, as I said, the post-planning is often based on these kind of gaps or errors, and it often results in grammar. Can I have the next page as well? Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And I think, that there's a kind of strange idea that because I might go into a classroom and say, my main interests are literature and music, that means these are the only things I want to talk about. It obviously doesn't. I might, if someone sells it to me in the right way, be really interested in reading a text about car manufacturing. I don't know. It depends on the text. It depends on what the teacher does with it. It depends on where it goes in the classroom. I might find myself fascinated by an article about the financial collapse. It depends on the text, on what we do with it, on what language comes out of it, on what talking emerges out of it. So just because, you express a particular interest, it doesn't mean that you won't be interested in doing other kinds of things in the classroom. I think also ultimately there's a bigger problem with this idea that as teachers we know what our students most need next. And that problem is that student needs are actually very broad and very big. Because what most of our students need, especially the students who are doing general English for general purposes, they need a whole range of things. They need repeated exposure to the most frequent words in the language. And they need to see those words working with other words, working with grammar, in a range of different contexts over time. They need a greater understanding of how those words work, with collocations, with grammar, with texts, with register. They need advice on how to deal with this burden of learning so much language that they're going to need in order to get to where they want to get to. They need to, at some point, put this advice into practice. They need to take some of the responsibility for learning some of this stuff outside of the class. Maybe by reading graded readers, by watching videos, by making revision cards, doing vocabulary self-study books, whatever. And they probably need us to kind of guide them towards some of these things that we want them to do. There's more. Next slide. I think students also need to read and they need to listen to a whole range of appropriately graded texts. across a wide range of social, academic, professional kinds of topics. They need to have space in the classroom where they can discuss their own responses to what they read and what they listen to. They need to have time and space to tell their own stories, tell their own opinions, share their own ideas, using some of the language that they've studied. And they need to have a teacher who's willing to step in and help them say some of these things better sometimes. They also, I think, need to become more aware, and this is something that needs repeated work, of how language actually sounds when it's spoken. I'm sure for many of you, you've had that experience of seeing something written down and thinking, yeah, I understand that. And then you hear it. And possibly, you hear it from two very different sources. You hear it from Jerry at the front here, who's from Glasgow, and from me at the front, who's from London. And it sounds very, very different, and it can be difficult to kind of process all of that if you're not used to those different kinds of accents. You need to get used to what happens with linking, assimilation, elision. You need to get used to a whole range of different accents, native and non-native. Next slide. There's more. Sometimes I think you do need to be corrected when you're making mistakes, including with grammar, but not only with grammar, particularly with language that you've previously studied, but maybe it's better sometimes just to be corrected on the spur of the moment and not to have the whole next hour of your life devoted to yet more massed practice of that particular error that you've just made. You probably need to spend some time consolidating and developing what you know already about how structural grammar works. But I think particularly as you get to intermediate level and you're aiming to go higher, what you then really need is you need to spend more time on lexis, looking at how vocabulary works, looking at multi-word units, looking at phrases, not exclusively, but possibly mainly. And you need to have a teacher who can explain these needs to you, to explain to them why sometimes the things that the students think they might want aren't necessarily the best things for them, and to guide them towards better ways of using the time that they've got. And I often think, sometimes the role of a teacher, to go back to this thing Marjorie was talking about, one of the roles we have, it's a bit like a doctor. You go to the doctor and you've got sort of chest pains and the doctor tells you it's your heart, you need to stop smoking and you need to kind of cut. No, that's not the end. What I think I need to do is I need you to give me some medicine and that's what I think I want. Sometimes it's the same with students. I get students who are stuck at kind of upper intermediate level. You ask them, what do you think you need more of? Grammar. Always grammar. Well, you can do Murphy's Grammar in Use again, if you want. You've done it 3 times already, but if you really think that's what's going to get you to first certificate, good luck. Or you can maybe tell them, okay, yeah, I know that's what you think you want. What I think you need to do is actually this. And that sometimes what we think as teachers students need to do may be different from what students think they need to do or what students want to do. So I would suggest actually these are the things generally most of our students want and need. Next slide. And the problem with thinking about needs in such a kind of global way is it's big and it's not something you can just take into the class tomorrow and say, I'm giving you now exactly what you need. To kind of meet all of these big needs, if you agree that these are things that students do need, it's a big job. It's the job of a whole course. It's the job of a whole learning journey for students from kind of elementary to advanced. And I think it's one of the advantages possibly of course books. Every course book obviously has its own kind of flaws, and often they have different kinds of flaws that different people will notice in different ways. I'm sure my own books have all kinds of flaws that maybe people notice that I don't notice myself. But I think whatever else you can say about course books, they're generally written with these big ideas about needs in mind. And they generally try to cover high-frequency vocab. They try to include a range of different text types. They try to include different accents. They try to include repeated exposure to language spaced out over time. And I think it's one of the reasons why, despite the sort of anti-course book brigade, many of us do still find ourselves using course books in the classroom. However, I I think there are also good reasons for sometimes not using them, and sometimes this may be to do with the whole issue of parsnips. Are you familiar with this idea, parsnips? Not the vegetable. Yeah? Parsnips, it's a kind of acronym, another acronym, and it's basically used to describe things that publishers tell coursebook writers not to include in coursebooks because they might be offensive. And it stands for politics, no politics, that's half of the world out of the window already. No alcohol, no religion, sex, what else is it going to be? I can't remember what the S is. I think the S is sex, narcotics or drugs. The I is isms. So, racism, feminism, anti-Semitism, take your pick, whatever. Any isms, we don't want those in the course books. The P is pork, okay? Religion again. And course books generally are edited in such a way that these topics are kind of kept out of the classroom. And I think this is one of the reasons why sometimes course books can seem a little bit bland, a little bit sort of not directly connected to the real world. And if you're looking at your own teaching situation and you're thinking, there's something going on in the world that I think my students would like to talk about, and I know it's not going to be covered in the course book because of the kind of parsnips restriction, then it may be a really good thing for you to decide, okay, I'm going to make some material on something contemporary, something that my students are talking about, and I'm going to bring that into the classroom. There are also lots of websites out there that provide kind of contemporary news-driven lessons for you. A lot of them are actually very template-driven. And I don't know if you know the way that a lot of websites will make material. They'll basically have a kind of fixed generic template that they apply to any particular news article or any particular video that's often kind of just computer-derived that will make the lesson for you. And this can be a useful way of bringing in a contemporary topic into the classroom. It can also sometimes, I think, show you the limitations of template-driven material and kind of web-created material. There's a very popular site called Breaking News, which some of you may know, which basically tries to have an article every day about a hot topic. And good to look at them, good to experiment with them, I think, but also good to be aware of the limitations that they might often have. So just imagine that you decide, okay, my course book's too limited, it's not contemporary enough, it's restrained by parsnips. My students, for example in London, a lot of my students have been talking about the kind of refugee crisis, about the kind of mass movement of people through Europe, about what's going to happen. You decide, course book's never going to provide this for me, I'm going to go online, I'm going to find a lesson based on this. So, this is what I did. I went to breakingnews.com. Can I have a look at the next slide? And this was it, okay? You can see some of the peculiar limitations already of a kind of template approach. Walk around the class, talk to other students about refugees. It's very general, good luck with that. Good luck containing some of the opinions that you may find coming out in the class. Change partners, share your findings. Next part, in pairs or groups, talk about these topics or words from the article. What will the article say? What can you say about these words? Act. Immediately. Turn a blind eye. Last century. Umpteenth. Have a chat about the topics you liked. I liked the topic umpteenth. What about you? Not really. Can you say something about your life using umpteenth? No, not really. So, you get this kind of very generic template which they use for everything that they get. And then you get an article. And because of the way the templates work, you can choose. You can make it a multi-choice exercise, you can make it a gap fill exercise, you can have comprehension questions based on the same article. So can I look at the next slide? Yeah. I think if you're doing this, and I'm not saying don't do this, I'm not saying don't look at the website, I think the really fundamental thing is, actually, that the questions you need to ask yourself Whether you're using a course book, whether you're making your own lessons based on something that you think isn't covered in the course book, or whether you're using a template-driven exercise that you've downloaded from some sort of website, the only real way that you're going to make sure that the language you're teaching your students in the class connects to the students and that your lesson connects to the students is to start your planning by thinking about the language that you're going to be taking into the classroom. And I think, for me, what's amazing and what's depressing about most of what I've been talking about so far is how rarely we talk about what we actually do when we're planning to teach particular language in the classroom as language teachers. All of the discussion that I had when I first started out was about activities and supplementing and downloading and experimenting. None of it was about what language are you teaching, what are you going to do with that language. And for me, the questions that I find myself asking now when I'm thinking about my planning are basically these. I look at whatever material I'm using, whether it's something I'm using from a course book or downloaded or I've made myself, and I'm thinking, what language is here for me to teach? Okay? Which items here are most frequent? Which items are most useful? Which items are most worth spending classroom time on? How am I going to draw attention to this language? How am I going to explain these items? What kind of examples might I give of these actual bits of language in the classroom? How can I make these bits of language relevant to my students' lives? How can I connect them to my students as we're exploring this language in the classroom? And for me, when I'm working with teachers, these are the questions I want to know the answers to. If I ask a teacher, so tell me what you're doing tomorrow, and they tell me I'm doing this, then no. I'm not interested in the activities that you're stringing together. I'm interested in what language are you trying to teach? What language from this do you think is most useful? What are you going to do with the language when you're in the classroom? Can I look at the next slide? So, imagine that you have decided, okay, you're going to take in breaking news, and you're going to do a little text about the refugee crisis. Here's a short text. It's a gap fill. I went for the gap fill option. This is supposed to be intermediate and above, according to the website. Imagine that you've decided you're going to have a little chat with your students about the refugee crisis. You want to do a reading about it, and then you want to do some language work connected to the text. Have a look at this particular reading text, okay? What I'd like you to do on your own, I'll give you a couple of minutes thinking time. From this reading text, just try to decide 3 items, 3 bits of vocabulary that you think would be really useful to focus on, okay? What would you say about them? When would you say this about them? Would you give any extra examples? Can you think of anything you might do to connect those bits of language to your students' lives? Okay? This is the last bit of thinking I'm going to ask you to do, so you may be relieved to hear that. Give me just a couple of minutes with the people next to you, okay? What do you think is worth focusing on there? Which bits of language? Why? What are you going to do with them? Where are you going to go with them? How are you going to connect them to your students' lives? Okay, I said in my quiet voice. We'll move on a little bit. All I'm going to do is just show you some of what I think about when I look at things like this, okay? And I think the first thing for me is, in a way, it almost doesn't matter what topic you take a text into the classroom about. I used to think what was most important was I had to find a text or a topic that students would be interested in. Now, I tend to think I have to find ways of making the language that's present in whatever text it is I'm doing relevant and interesting to the students. And by starting my planning much more by thinking about the language that's there, thinking about what I'm going to do with the language, thinking about what I'm going to ask my students to do with the language, I think it makes sure that whatever the topic is, it connects in some way to the students' lives. And, you know, having looked slightly critically at the introduction that was provided to this particular lesson, I look at the text and I think, wow, there's some good stuff there. You know, there's lots of quite nice language there. There's a call on somebody to act immediately. There's tragedy, you know, flee from their troubled homelands. There's all kinds of bits of vocabulary that you might want to look at, okay? What I think is important to do is to kind of be selective, because you can't go into depth about everything. It's to pick bits of language that are maybe most frequent, that the students are most likely to see again, and it's to think about where can we go with that language, what can we get students to do with it. So if you see the next slide, this is just two things I picked up on. I thought the first one that I liked was flee. It's a fairly high frequency word, it's a 2-star word in most dictionaries. And I guess what I would do is, as I was going through the answers, get students to try the exercise, compare the answers in pairs, check, go through. Number 1, that's right, act. Yeah, they called on them to act immediately. These words go together. Number 2, that's right, flee. So they had to flee their country. They had to escape from their country. At the moment, lots of people fleeing Syria because there's a war between lots of different groups in the country. So they're fleeing to escape the civil war, okay? Other reasons maybe why you might flee your country. Maybe you're sort of a minority political group or a minority religious group. Maybe there are lots of sort of negative practices against you. So you're fleeing to escape persecution. You're good at this, you guys, okay? You know, to seek refuge elsewhere. At the moment, lots of Eritreans, for example, fleeing to escape compulsory military service, which seems to last 10 to 15 years for some people. Fleeing after a devastating earthquake, after a devastating flood. And I would kind of explore the language around the word that I'm teaching. Thinking about not just what does the word mean, but what else might you say connected to flee? Who flees from where, why? The other one that I picked up on was the next slide. I think launch is always good. You know, it's a 3-star word in most dictionaries, very common verb. So yeah, they've launched an official inquiry into the incident. They've launched a major military offensive in the south. They've launched an investigation into the killing. They've launched a campaign to persuade people not to drink and drive. So again, just looking at some of the words that go with the words you're teaching. And with these, if you think about this beforehand and you build this into your planning, when you're eliciting it in class, there's a lovely feeling if students know the answer. You know, ideally, you choose words that you think they will know, or that you think they should know. When they know the words, there's a kind of, oh, well done, you remembered something. Sometimes it's unusual students, you know, it's the guy who sits at the back looking half asleep, who suddenly shouts out, persecution! Oh, you're alive back there. Something's happening. You've remembered something. Congratulations. So, you know, it's a way for students to kind of make their learning visible. It's a way for students to show the rest of the class and themselves and the teacher, I know this one, I've got this. Once you've then got this, next slide. What you can then do is, okay, we've looked at the text, we've talked a bit about the topic, going to do a little bit of talking just about some of the vocabulary. So it might be, you know, depending on the group, if you have a group that you think will go for this. Have you heard of any inquiries or police investigations launched recently? Government launched any campaigns? Do you think they'll be successful? What kind of campaign would you like them to launch? Heard of any military attacks being launched? You may or may not want to go there. Depends on your context. Can you think of any new products that have been launched recently? Do you like them? Why not? And again, not every student will want to talk about all of those questions, but you try to make them broad enough that there's something there for everybody. And I think what that does is, it takes the language from the page, from the course book, from this kind of cold, dead text, and it somehow transfers that into something that has some reality or something that has some meaning to your students' lives. Can I have the last slide? Yeah. So, we often hear in language teaching this idea of adapting material or adapting course books or adapting what we're doing in the classroom. For me, I think, if we're serious about adapting the material and leaving space in the classroom for the students, the most important people in the room, and if we really want to ensure that there's some kind of personal engagement, personal motivation, personal connection to what's going on in the classroom, and if you want that language to be memorable, you want that language to be meaningful, maybe we're looking at planning in the wrong way. And maybe, instead of thinking about what else can I do about this topic, what extra grammar practice can I do, maybe what we should be thinking about is, okay, what language is there? What am I going to do with this language? How am I going to connect this language to my students? And maybe return the main focus of planning language lessons to the language. I'm going to stop there. Can I just have one final slide? Yeah, if you want to add me to your PLN. There's a few things there. If you want copies of the slides, feel free to email me. I'm Hugh@LexicalLab. If any of you do Facebook, I'm on there. It's facebook.com, Hugh Della, Andrew Walkley. I've also got a website where I kind of infrequently and not as often as I'd like to blog and write about teaching and things, which is Lexical Lab. And we have a language school called londonlanguagelab.com, which you can have a look at and see as well. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention and for not dying when I shouted stop there. Thank you. I think we've got a few minutes before lunch, so if anyone's got any questions you're dying to ask now. Don't be shy, yeah. My planning process. Yeah, I mean, the main way it's changed is now, I don't think about supplementing, basically. I don't think about what extra game can I add, what activity can I add, what extra grammar practice can I add. I basically think about what's on the page, okay? What language is there? How am I going to explain that language? What examples am I going to give? What questions am I going to ask about that language? What am I going to expect the students to maybe do with that language? So it's much, much, much more focused on what language is there and what we're going to do with that language in the classroom. And I would say, what's changed is I don't do any of that extra, I don't have a folder of extra supplementary stuff anymore. Instead, I basically have the course book or whatever material I'm using and the language that's there and me and the students and the interaction between that. So, it's a huge shift away from the way I was trained to think about planning. It's also much more interesting because it's basically thinking about language. And sometimes still, I'll look at things and I'll sometimes think, I don't know how to explain that word. I don't know a good example for that word. I need to look that word up. I need to think of what we do with that word. I need to decide whether that word's even worth focusing on or not. And it just makes me think much more about what language am I going to spend time on in class and which is going to be the most useful. I don't always get it right. Sometimes I'll come out of class and think, oh, why did I give that example? I should have given this one. But even then, my reflection on my teaching is much more about the language that I'm actually teaching than it is about, wouldn't it have been great if only we could have done a game? And I think it's more involving. It's more involving for students because the language is constantly being connected to them a lot more. So I might be asking, any other reasons why people flee their country, any other kind of things you can launch, getting ideas from them, working with that, giving them a chance to talk about those things. And whatever language you've got, there's an opportunity to do that if you build that into your planning. Yeah? You see, I cheat now because I use my own course books. If you can't teach from your own course books, what can you do in life? I tend to use outcomes these days, which is one I prepared earlier. But you know, to be honest, if I was using headway, I would still be using it in the same way I'm using outcomes. I'd still, you know, there's some good language in those books. I think about them in a different way now. I think about them not as something I have to supplement. I think as something I have to look at the language in, and something I have to think about what I'm going to do with that language. So whatever book you're using, you know, I'm not saying this can only be done using my course books, obviously. It can be done using anything. It can be done using the downloaded stuff off the internet. But yeah, I cheat and use my own. Anyone else got anything you wanted to ask? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying thank you. No. No, to be honest. The way I tend to think about technology is I like it for homework purposes, okay? So with every class I'm teaching, I use Quizlet. I don't know if any of you use Quizlet. I basically make flashcards based on all of the language that I'm looking at in the classroom. I'll make kind of gapped flashcards testing their memory of the vocabulary. I sometimes use Vocaroo. So sometimes what I will do is I will record 40 sentences, I will send the students the sentences, they write them down, and then maybe they write their own examples based on the language that's there. But it tends to be homework. In the classroom, I basically use my mouth, my brain, the board, and my students. Yeah. One more, anyone? Time for lunch, dinner, take your pick. Time for food. Okay, thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your coming. You're always invited. So, somewhere.
You don't need to.
Right, a couple of announcements. First, if you could look at your programs. There is a little change in the program. Natalia Dechuk, for various reasons hasn't come, and unfortunately we had to cancel her presentation, her workshop, but we asked Lena Horos to move her workshop from Saturday to today. So at 3:30, instead of Natalia Dechuk, you will have Olena Horos. And on Saturday, instead of Olena Horos, which was planned for Saturday, we will have Lyudmila Yezhachenko from the British Council. This is a new workshop, it hasn't been in the program, so that will be a workshop on recycling and reviewing material. Should be interesting. Another thing, in the area of book exhibition, there is a table of SOL, S-O-L, sharing own learning, and there is Gradville there, who offers a raffle, and you can win a course, a teacher development course, outside Ukraine, somewhere. You can come up to the table now during the break, and the raffle will take place at the general annual meeting tomorrow. We will announce the winners. SOL, S-O-L, table, S-O-L. Right, next thing, the canteen is expecting us at 1:05, so don't hurry, you've got plenty of time. At 1:05, not earlier, and we haven't prepared lunch as we announced on the website. There is a sandwich break with tea and coffee. There is an assortment of sandwiches, and there is one of each type for everyone. Do you see what I mean? And about 10 kinds of sandwiches and one of each for everyone. It's downstairs where you have the registration, and if you look at the registration, they continue from the right, from the entrance. And there are some people from the university. And one last thing, do we have Olena Solovyova in this hall? Good. Thank you. Enjoy sandwiches.
Perfect.